And so we are 9.2 policy IKF revisions, the first reading. So Brian, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, thank you for asking. Tonight we will be informed about revisions to policy IKF developed by the Graduate with Options Strategic Plan Committee. Leading our presentation tonight is our Assistant Superintendent, Dr. Julie Chaplin, and our Chief Institutional Effectiveness Officer, Dr. Dwayne Schmitz. Doctor, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. President Draper, Vice President Zamora, Board Directors, and Superintendent Kingsley, we are going to talk tonight about a graduation requirement option for the board to consider as we move forward. Tonight, the purpose really is four things. We're going to discuss the why behind proposing these changes to policy IKF, which has to do, of course, with graduation requirements. We're going to review the process that we use to collaboratively develop this proposal. We're going to preview the recommended policy change and updates for your consideration. And then we'll engage with you around questions you have in preparation of the second reading, which would be on April 9th. Sound good? Okay. So Poudre School District has a diploma that has a lot of integrity, and this board and I think our community has seen a lot of data around that, so I just want to mention that. We have a lot of data over lots of years that kind of back that statement up. At the same time, we have a changing landscape of opportunities for our students that has emerged over the last 5 or 10 years, where we have work-based learning opportunities, and we have different things like concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment, associate's degrees, all kinds of different possibilities, internships, and so on. So to create some space for students to be able to access those opportunities and kind of enrich, if you will, and elevate these opportunities for them, we are going to talk about graduation requirements. If you think about 10/24/24, it's a couple months ago, a while back, I guess, we had a session in here on graduating with options. And I just want to remind you that we heard from students that night from Poudre High School, and we heard from a teacher from Poudre High School and some other folks, right, around the junior ROTC program and others. And I wanted to remind you that some of the things we heard from students is that they would like a bit more consolidation in these key requirements. We also heard that students were excited about getting associate's degrees and other nationally recognized credentials. We heard that one student mentioned, a sophomore, that they had been wanting to be an engineer for a while and they were just a sophomore. My point there is there are students in our system who do have thoughts about what they want for their career pathway. And lots of students want to explore multiple different pathways and start figuring that out. And that's what this conversation is really about, is how do we create space and time for students to do those explorations. And by the way, PSD had about 7 students in 22-23 who did get an associate's degree in our district. I also want to mention that the number of students we have trying to access these opportunities is not trivial. At the lower portion of that slide in those colored boxes, you can see we had, in 2022-23, we had 1,106 students who had a work-based learning experience. We had 628 who earned CTE certifications. We had about 3,332 students who took college courses, and that includes Campus Select, High School Select, Ascent, P-TECH, T-REP. There's so many different opportunities where kids are getting college credits and even degrees and credentials and in our system. So that's what tonight's conversation is about, is how do we expand those opportunities so that more and more students are able to access them, okay? So in this changing landscape of opportunities, college credits at no cost to the families and the students is a big deal. College has become very, very expensive, so lots and lots of our students are getting those college credits in high school. Students want to explore those multiple different pathways. The proposal tonight, as we use that language about 4-year plans and pathways and such, just to be clear, no student is locked into any kind of a pathway or exploration just because they begin to explore and take courses, okay? But we do want them to have access to that kind of exploration if they would like to do so. We already mentioned the associate's degree possibility, but another piece is the job-ready skills. So it's a big deal nationwide, statewide, and in our district that we want to give students opportunities that lead to living wage jobs that are in high-demand industries if that's the pathway they wish to take. And so this is, again, what we're talking about with our graduation requirement, recommendation. I think it's eye-opening to realize that there were 225 plus businesses that are participating with us on creating these kind of work-based learning and internship opportunities. It's a huge number of businesses. One of the reasons that exists is we've got work-based learning coordinators at each of our high schools. That's very unusual, and that's one piece of the puzzle. And the other piece is we have a really great partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, and there's folks that are looking day and night at work for these opportunities for the youth of our community. So that's how we get to these great outcomes that PSD has been able to talk about in our monitoring report and such. The last piece I want to just highlight real quick is that a lot of students can take their first year of college for free through the Ascent program or TREP, and the truth is that is free college to those students, and it doesn't break the bank in Poudre School District because we actually get a remuneration back from the state for that programming. So it's a win-win-win. Everybody wins in this, including society at large. PSD had an estimate, by the way, of about $6 million in tuition expenses that our students didn't pay in 2022-23. That's across all the grade levels based on all the college credits that were earned. That's real money for families, and that's because of these kinds of opportunities. Okay, so what happens when students get engaged in their interests and passions while at school, which is what this is all about? Without going into detail on every little sub-chunk of that table data and those line graphs, I just want to point out that there is a positive relationship between higher levels of student connections to their interests and passions in high school and the following things. Attendance goes up, discipline rates go down, and achievement and growth go up. That data, if you took a moment to truthfully look at it carefully and compare it to the next slide I'm about to show you, would bear out what I'm saying, okay? The data that we're looking for is derived from 3,999 students, approximately 4,000 students who are high school students who have taken the connection survey, and they indicated 75% or higher kind of a responsive yes to feeling connected to their interests and passions. When we then, I'm going to flip the slide, and we're going to look at students who indicated less than 75% connection to their interests and passions while at school. And when I do that, if we had time to look at this really carefully and go into the weeds on it, what you would see at the end of the day is that attendance rates have gone down from about 92% to about 83% across these groups. Discipline has gone up from about 2% to 4%. Achievement has gone down. So everything moves in the wrong direction when students don't feel connected to their interests and passions at school, or they feel less connected. I shouldn't say that they don't feel connected, but if they feel less connected, that's the simple takeaway. So again, I'm setting the stage for why are we considering graduation requirement changes? And it's all about student and family agency, opportunities, because we've been talking about graduating with options, and so we're making space for students to explore those options.
Great, and as we talk about options for students to graduate, our current policy does not have options for all of our students to graduate with a diploma from Poudre School District. Nor does it have flexibility built in to allow all students to meet those graduation requirements. And so we have, in the revised policy additions that you have access to, we have created another subsection that we call the recommendations for what we are calling, opportunities for diverse learners. And there's two populations that we're targeting in that section of the policy. The first is our students with disabilities. So in the first section, the students on an individualized education plan, as it is currently today and has been in practice for Poudre School District as long as I can remember and before that, if you took an alternative assessment, state assessment on the alternative assessment, whether you met the graduation requirements or not, you were not eligible for a diploma. That is what we are requesting to have in policy that is changed. So that regardless of whether you take the state assessment, SAT, PSAT, 9, 10, or you take the alternative assessment that meets your learning level, if you meet graduation requirements, you can earn a diploma. Previously, students were given a certificate of attendance. Okay. The second piece that's really impactful for students on an individualized education plan is allowing their IEPs really to sort of drive their graduation plan. In every IEP, there is a planned course of study, and that aligns with their 4-year plan. And what we're recommending that you adopt and vote approval for is that those students and their IEP teams can make decisions about the coursework that they need to take in order to fulfill those graduation requirements or possibly replace and waive graduation requirements. That really aligns, again, with their course plans of study that meets their post-secondary and transition goal outcomes. So that's the first part. The second part we want to address is the opportunities for multilingual learners. There's 2 areas in this as well. The first is allowing them to earn a standard, I need to flip the slide, is allowing them to earn that diploma and replacing some of our credits that are needed in language arts, in world language, other graduation requirements, but allowing the ELD courses and the programming that's required for them to gain supports, English proficiency, allowing those courses to count as graduation requirements. So that's area 1. The second area is that currently, when we have students that come into Poudre School District that are immigrant students, if they have no transcript or formal records, which is not uncommon for some of these families, then they start in Poudre School District. They have, as of right now, no matter what grade level they're in, 9, 10, 11, 12, they start with 0 credits. And they've got to go up to 240 to get there. And so what we are proposing is that the immigrant students and David Ottenreith and his team be able to look at each of those immigrant students and provide some of that credit accumulation, whether we have a formal transcript or not, that gives credit for education that they have participated in their home country before coming here. So that puts them on a much better trajectory for on-time graduation than what currently exists today. So those 2 pieces are in the packet as language, in addition to what we will continue to talk about for the specific requirements. So as we've talked about a little bit, this whole process that Dwayne and I have been engaging in has been completely iterative. It's been a process of us creating a scenario, and much like Josie talked about, how they created this scenario to start a conversation, that's exactly what we did. So our first scenario that we put out in our first timeline, the original action team recommendation was really, let's start a conversation. And it started with 110 credits of additional coursework. We blew the gates open to say, what could be the maximum options that we think we could look at, right? And what's the conversation we have? So we went around and we engaged with different community stakeholders, district level staff, and I have another slide that'll kind of document what we went through, and gathered feedback on that. Then in that December timeline, we met and revised some of those revisions again, and we came up with a second draft. And that paired it from 110 credits of additional coursework, adding some more requirements in, based upon some of the things we heard in the community that we'll outline more specifically, and reduced down to 85 additional course credits. Again, we shopped that around, went to more community feedback sessions, came back to the full committee, and what before you we have is the final proposal, which actually we have 2 versions of. We do have a We do have a recommendation for you, but we want you to see both considerations as the committee felt both were options that they wanted you to see. And so one of them has 85 credits, but it does look different than what has been shown before and what was different in the first round. And then the other option has 95 credits, and that's that attempt to try to gain more flexibility in the system in a level of what we thought could be another option. Okay, now we're here tonight at the first board reading. We're going to get feedback from you, and there's time for us again to go back to the action team. We actually have a couple more groups that we're going to get some feedback from in the next weeks. And so then we will then go back and make revisions one more time before coming to you with any final revisions for that piece. So that's that process. And we really have taken feedback and adjusted every single step along the way. So as we look at some of the community partners on the left side of the screen, you're going to see these are more community outreach. So yes, there's some district committees, but there's a lot of community, mainly community folks and parents on these committees. So some of these we've visited multiple times. And so we have the Student Advisory Committee. That's really where it started. We've been there multiple times. District Advisory Board we've hit multiple times. District Accountability Committee. We've worked with work-based learning coordinators. We have input from industry partners. We will be continuing to reach out with the Chamber of Commerce. And then we had 2 community input engagement sessions as well to the public. On the right side of the screen, we're more staff-specific in PSD. And so some of the other things that I didn't put up there, we left off, we went to a staff equity coalition, but we've multiple times with secondary principals, assistant principals, counselors, curriculum, facilitators, we've hit multiple times. We went to then their district level curriculum teams to meet with the lead teachers to present to them and gotten feedback, integrated services staff. We also hit special ed advisory committee twice, student services staff, learning services staff. We hit the staff equity coalition, and we know there's a couple more groups that we're working with our coordinator of diversity, equity, inclusion, Delia Mahaney, to get some more feedback on a couple of groups that we hadn't had yet. So that's the process. And I'll have Dwayne share with you the themes of what that feedback was. We can break it down into several themes, and then we'll go through the next. Here was the first version, second version, and here's the version of recommendations today.
Thank you, Julie. Like, whoo, right? It's like a whirlwind, right?
Sorry.
That's how it felt, though. Like, it's been 3-4 months, I'd say, and a ton of going out and showing off what we've got, the thinking of the action team, not Julie and I, and getting feedback, revising, just like Julie said. It's just been a lot, and it's been good. So here were the big themes, right? There was different themes by different groups and during these different models, but when I pull it all together, just overall, what does the board really need to hear on some of these overarching themes? Here they are. Okay, 1, people, and when I say people, students, parents, staff, all community members, everybody, likes the flexibility concept and that students and families have agency and can explore options for themselves about their interests and that they can customize their education. People like this concept that there's pathways, that it's not like every kid's getting the exact same thing. So that was a plus. Simplified structures. People like, across the board again, simple is good, right? Unless it's wrong, but simple is good. So people like a simplified structure. It's very clear, like all the things will show you what is required. It's easy to understand, so it'll be easy to communicate. Specific requirements, people advocated for certain courses. In the first round, we didn't have financial literacy as required. It currently is required for students to graduate. We had taken that off along with a few other things, and there was overwhelming feedback from all fronts to put financial literacy on the required list. So it is, and it has been now for several iterations. Likewise, fine and applied arts and wellness were also more of a 50-50 split. People have arguments on both sides of whether we should or shouldn't be requiring or how much we should require versus the tension that you get around agency and freedom versus expose kids to these things, right, students. So that one was on there. World language also, which to be super clear, is not a current requirement, right? It's world language and or culture. So there are plenty of students in PSD over the last 10 years who've graduated who did not, in fact, take 10 credits of world language. Nonetheless, that also has been a conversation. Should world language be 10 credits required or not? And if it's not required and it's recommended, why 10? Should it be 10 to 30? So we've had a couple iterations on that. Number 4 on this list, implementation concerns. Folks gave us strong feedback. So regardless of what decisions the board makes, if we change graduation requirements, we have to pay attention to the communication plan, the training for our staff, our counselors, our teachers, our families, because we clearly want our students to have the guidance of all these caring adults. So people need to understand what these options are and how to access them. So that came out through the implementation concern and the support. Well, I'll just take them one at a time. So number 5, equity and access. Another strong theme is that our community values equitable access to opportunities. We're proud of that. So specifically for historically marginalized populations, and there's a lot of ways we could talk about that, but what comes to mind when you think historically marginalized populations, that we keep our eye on that, make sure people have access. That can include things like transportation, because not all opportunities are available at all sites, and so some amount of transportation comes into play there. I want to mention at this point that we had, Julie and I, in our presentations during all these months, had talked about the importance of students that needs support courses. That part of the reason we would build some flexibility into schedules is to make sure that students support it with IEPs, students support it with read plans, multilingual learners, actually had access to all these great opportunities of work-based learning and, the Futures Lab and all that cool stuff that we have going on. So because we talked about that up front, I just am giving it special mention. It didn't show up as a community concern, like make sure that happens, but I think that's because we addressed it up front, right? People very much, that resonated with people is what I'm trying to share, that we do that. The last one is support for our educators, right? There are concerns anytime you change graduation requirements. How's that going to impact scheduling? How's that going to impact choices students make? And so on. And then based on that, how would that impact staffing and resources? And so those are legitimate concerns. One thing I want to mention at this point is that Poudre School District will study, no matter what choices the Board of Education makes on this, if we change graduation requirements, we will systematically study for the next several years how that impacted course-taking patterns and such, right? We won't leave it up to chance. Okay, so there's some input themes that we gathered. Now we're going to do just kind of a quick run through on two versions. So the first big version that we put out for feedback, keeping in mind, like was mentioned in the earlier presentation, the purpose of this version was to generate feedback and thinking and public deliberation, right? And to cut to the chase on this one, humanities, economics, financial literacy, wellness, fine applied arts, and world language were all moved off the required bucket, basically, or the required list, okay? Additional coursework was increased, and that's a new name for what we have traditionally just called electives. So when I say additional coursework, electives, we're giving it that name because we want to signify it's not just things like art and PE. It might be additional math classes and history courses. It's additional coursework that doesn't for a bucket that's not already filled of requirements, okay? At any rate, the first version had us move from 65 elective credits up to 110. And to give context, not so much for the board, but the viewing public that I know is still up. At what time is it? Almost 10 o'clock watching. 5 credits is a course at a 4x4 block high school in a quarter. So each 5 credits. So when we say, we're going from 65 to 110 credits, you can do the math on how many different 5 credit, 1 quarter courses that equates to. Okay, not trying to slow down here too much. We shifted to version 2 with the action team. When I say we, it's not Julie and I, it's an action team that sat down and revised a recommendation based on the feedback that we'd gotten for about 6 weeks, I think. At any rate, in version 2, as we continue to listen to stakeholders, financial literacy, like I mentioned before, comes back on the required list, and it stays there through all the iterations, okay? We came up with this concept of core electives where wellness, fine applied arts, and world language were each included, and there's a requirement that 20 credits had to be earned from any combination of those three, and then that got revised a little bit further, so it was at least 5 credits in wellness, at least 5 in applied arts, fine applied arts, and then world language, which didn't have a required minimum. So this version saw additional coursework go up from the current 65 current electives, right, to 85. But that's down from 110, the other version that we'd been floating around. So we got feedback based on this version, many other things staying the same, and I'll go a little more depth on the higher education admission recommendations and how those recommendations align with all 3 of these different versions we floated as we look at the last and final one, because I want to really spend our time on what the proposal is, the recommendation. So this is the recommendation to the Board of Education. And so I'm going to slow down just a little bit and orient us all to this. On the left-hand side of this slide are the current required coursework requirements, right, for Poudre School District. On the right-hand side of the slide is the coursework under the proposal that we're making to the Board of Education. And as I walk through this a little bit, you can see that language art, and sorry, let me back up a little bit. On the far right-hand column is the higher education admission recommendations. Those are developed from the Colorado Department of Higher Education. They gathered information from Colorado universities, and they come up with this list of recommended credits. This does not mean that a student will not be able to access or get into a 4-year university in Colorado if they don't meet these. It's just a recommendation for the system to have some shared understanding, okay? At any rate, Poudre School District, past and current, proposal, meets those higher education admission recommendations for language arts and science, social studies, and additional coursework or electives in all versions, right? Mathematics, they recommend 40. We've had 30 in the past, and we're sticking with that 30 in this proposal. So those subjects, language arts, math, science, are all staying fairly consistent from our past to our current recommendation. Social studies has just been shuffled around a little bit and really truthfully went from 25 required credits in the current state to 30. And the state required by law that we identify a course where Holocaust material is taught, and that we have identified that course. We identify that course to be world history. That's a choice Poudre School District makes. That becomes then a required course going forward as of as of the future, okay? We had to identify the course by next year, which we've done. At any rate, there's a little bit of reshuffling of the social studies coursework requirements, right? So world history is required, U.S. history, which still is. Civics was required, still is required at the same level. There's an additional 5 credits of social studies classes that are required. The meat of the conversation really comes down to the next couple pieces. So financial literacy has been required currently and still is required, okay? Wellness, we're recommending that it's a requirement at 10 credit hours, okay? Fine and applied arts, we're recommending at 10 credit hours. And additional coursework is at 85. So when you think about what did that really buy us, 20 credits, which is 4 of those 5 credit courses, 1/4 classes in a block schedule, 20 credits of additional coursework above the 65 electives we currently have. And it it gets us in sync with the requirements under social studies. We added another piece down below of recommended additional coursework because we want to signal to our family community, our counselors, our teachers, our students, that world language, we're recommending students take 10 to 30 credits, and that's very much based on what their goals are in learning that language and their post-secondary goals are to determine is it the 10, 20, or 30. We're recommending the humanities classes at 5 credits, geography at 5, economics at 5, and health or teen choices at 5. But to be clear, those are all recommendations. They're not requirements for graduation. Julie, do you want to add anything to that walkthrough?
Yeah, I would say, number one, I think geography is 10, but I know my social studies people will chime in if we don't correct that now. So it is 10 recommended, and we'll make that adjustment. But the only other piece that I would say is we did also, when we looked at moving from 110 to 85 credits, we did talk with, the work-based learning and Tanya Alcaraz, who does a lot of our CTE programming and community partners, to determine, is 20 credits, like, is the bang worth our buck, right? Is this enough to really make an impact and make space for students to take advantage of some of these opportunities? And they felt like, yes, that would be. So I think as we were moving forward with our revisions, we felt that 85 was acceptable. We certainly could go better, but that would be acceptable, and going less was something we did not want to engage in a conversation of in the adjustments in order to make space in that programming. So. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt the flow. So the parentheses, Dwayne, I'm not sure if you spoke to this, but were you about to do that?
I can do that, yeah.
Yep. We'll
Okay,
talk.
sorry.
We're
Yeah,
going to
I'll
talk
stop
about that. So we have our main recommendation, and then we'll kind of talk about. We do have a version 2 policy in the packet as well. And no,
No,
you're
that's good.
good. You're fine. And so yeah.
Can I take that
Yep.
away?
Go ahead.
So the action team meets, talks, takes all the feedback and discusses, right? So the recommendation to the board right now is the, in black, bold, the 10, 85 additional coursework, okay? But like Julie was saying, there is a desire for maximum flexibility for students. And so the furthest, the action team is indicating that the furthest they would want to go with like increasing that flexibility would be to create 95 credits of flexibility, right, in additional coursework. And the way you would get there is by reducing the requirements for fine and applied arts to 5 and wellness to 5. I want to share with you all that as Julie and I have walked around and spent many, many hours talking, listening with people, that I feel that we're right in that zone of landing in a good spot. I think it's one of the reasons we didn't have a long list of community commenters tonight that would be staff who would have been very upset with this option or with that option. Because as we walk through this process, that the 10-10-85 is probably the clear, safe, palatable, tractionable like option in this district. If we move toward that 5-5, 95 to create yet more flexibility. In all honesty, I think there'll be a little more pushback and anxiety from the teachers and some of the departments in our system. They can live with that, but it's going to create a little more anxiety and stress. And so that's what we're trying to signal.
And I would also say some of our community partners in the mental health and wellness areas, those private community partners, we've received communications from the Fort Collins Department of Health. So I think they also would resonate that, they see a priority in the district honoring some of that, which is also why we opted to put as a recommended course health or teen choices, because that does really hit some of those core components that would be good foundational skills, but didn't want to call it out as a specific requirement that would prevent you from graduating high school.
And I think, Julie, unless you have anything else that you're thinking about that we should add, that we are about there to open up for just conversation with you all and just Q&A. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much. Questions? Yes, go ahead.
I want to thank you guys. This is great work and really a testament to getting the community involved and getting that feedback. When I heard financial literacy was universally pushed for when it was on the docket of being taken off, that spoke to me, because that is
Yeah.
near and dear to my heart. I think there is no better way to avoid lifelong misery than to understand how finances work and things like that. So, and I loved that our community spoke back and let us know how important wellness was. I think that's really important in today's society, that we really emphasize that it is important, not just, exercise absolutely, but also wellness and learning those types of things. And just from my own experience, the art classes, getting exposure to that and requiring exposure to that, I think is really important because kids may not know that that's really where they want to go. My own daughter, that's absolutely what happened to her between freshman and sophomore year, and now that is her career, graphic design. So thank you for all that work. I love these recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's what we heard as well, so.
Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Just fantastic job on community comment. I'll echo that, and I trust your judgment on the 10-10-85. That sounds good.
Awesome.
Can you just share how many credits are possible for a student to get in 4 years?
Yeah, that'd be great. Just, yes,
320.
that would be perfect, especially for those watching still. But yes, so every year you can earn 80 credits. And so you can earn 320 credits over your 4 years if you were to take a full schedule of all periods every quarter of your high school career. So, yeah, so our requirements of 240 still does have flexibility even beyond that.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Connor.
Two questions really quick. The wellness requirement, 10 credits, is that sexual education or no? Or is that gym class?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the wellness, in that category, it is the physical education classes. It is health, which does have, it doesn't have sexual education. It does have topics, drug awareness. It does have information about STDs and how to be safe, but it also has mental health, how to manage your stress, your anxiety,
So that health portion of
Yes.
it is still required.
It's not. No, it's a choice. So in the wellness, you pick 10 credits, and there is a whole menu of classes. It also includes classes offered in family consumer sciences. So you could take nutrition, you could take, culinary, food and nutrition and culinary. You can also take teen choices, which covers similar topics. And it's mostly like sexual violence and, how do I keep myself safe? How do I make safe choices? I'd say anything that's along those mental health and social emotional guidelines. Those are both kind of in teen health and teen choices and health, but they don't have to take those classes.
Right.
It's still a choice.
Which is what the case is currently too.
Right. The 15 credits in the current case is not health. It can be all
No,
gym classes.
that's right.
That's correct. And it's 10 now, but it's not health. It doesn't have to be. It can be all PE classes. It can be none. It can be all in family consumer
Yep.
sciences,
Okay. And
as well as waivers for athletics and things like that.
second question, I think the community has some concerns on the off-ramps for kids who get into a tract and they find out that it just isn't there.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit how that's built in
Yeah,
and
I'd
how
love
we have safeguards
Absolutely.
to ensure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I'd love to. So when we say pathways, right, and I like 4-year plans or pathways, it is not the case that a student has to sign up for a pathway and they start taking courses such that those courses wouldn't apply to general graduation requirements, right? There's tremendous amount of leeway. And so in no way does a student getting into a pathway, take an example like advanced manufacturing, and a student takes a class or two in advanced manufacturing and they decide that's not for me. What a great thing to discover while you're still in high school, right? Before you spent all the money and went to college somewhere or whatever. And so those courses go into their additional coursework requirement, right? So those courses still count. And they still were on track to take the math and the language arts and the social studies that they needed to take to graduate. So being on these pathways in no way locks down a student. I want to share this. I heard from a couple parents, a concern is, what about my student who doesn't know they want to go to college until they wake up one day, they're a junior or they're a senior, and they kind of realize, hey, I really do want to go to college. Which plan would they be better under, our current graduation requirements or these proposed graduation requirements? And the answer is clearly they are much better under these new proposed graduation requirements. And the reason is a couple of the courses that are no longer required, they're still available, so students can choose to take them. But those courses in particular are generally saved and taken during those junior and senior years. And those just aren't requirements. And so you've got that space. So a student might say, I need a little more math, or I need a little bit more language arts, or I need a little bit more of whatever. It may be art. My daughter also went off to a College of Art and Design. She very much wanted to take advantage of Rocky's amazing menu of options. So it gives that student more flexibility to customize right before they launch and start paying some big bucks for that same exact training elsewhere that they can get for free in PSD. So it is better for that student.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the creativity in looking at the problem through a lens of trying to solve this in a creative way, but also having the humility to engage in that iterative process that you did and come back with a different recommendation than how this started.
Yeah.
And it shows that you were listening to the input. There was a compromise made there, but I think it was a very important to listen to that value statement, because requirements are value statements. And so putting our value statements in and focus on health and wellness, I think was a good move. But I just want to commend you for approaching it through the lens of really graduating with options. That's the really big bucket. And then diving into it to present to us this thing. You should be really proud of the work you did.
Thanks.
So
I feel great, and I've loved working with Julie on this project.
Yeah.
It's been
Back at
great.
you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, and I want to ditto what everybody else has said about the great work that you've done, and I want to thank the staff also that helped out in this work and your committees. I think personally for me, having been on the board since 2014 and having been really concerned about our graduation requirements since like 2016, for me, this feels really good. It feels like a culmination of values that our students and our families have expressed to us about wanting to see a change in our graduation requirements, because I think there were unintended consequences from the last time we changed our graduation requirements for our ELA students, for our students with IEPs, right? We practically eliminated choice for them, and I think that really, for me, raises up the whole equity question, even for this decision. And I noticed you said you were going to meet with some other people, and I saw the list of the ones that you had up there. And I hope some of the committees that you're going to meet with are going to be EDAC and maybe SEAC as well.
We have with SEAC.
Yeah,
Okay.
we've met with SEAC
You met with
twice.
SEAC, okay. And the reason I want to hear their values, and I want to hear if they have any concerns that there might be unintentional consequences here, that we have looked at this with an equity lens, right? That this is a decision that's already had that equity lens put on it. And I just would like the community to hear that yes, we're thinking about this with an equity
Yeah, I
lens.
so appreciate the feedback, and we started with our Staff Equity Coalition. When we went to one of our community feedback sessions, we actually had a young gentleman who was in our high schools, the only student that attended any of our sessions that weren't, a student advisory committee, and he was from the Student Equity Coalition, and he spoke to say, hey, can this come to, we thought this was going to come to us, and we had heard maybe it was going to, and Dwayne and I, we hadn't heard that, we hadn't gotten an invite, we didn't know when they were meeting, so reached out to Delia when we got back to say, can we do this? So we're working with her. I'm not sure if she wants to call a special meeting, but we've got options we're thinking of being able to do little quick screencast maybe, and get out a form for them electronically to give feedback. And then similarly with EDAC. And so that is, and we are on their agenda for next Thursday, 5:30 to 7:30. So we do appreciate that feedback, as we were not trying to, we were meticulously what groups. So, so we needed to rely on everybody to kind of help tick our brains on who else do we need to talk, or who we feel like we want to talk to, or who wants to be, heard from. And so, yeah, I think at the end of the day, we may have created a nice little master list of, if we do these sorts of iterative processes, what are some of these groups that we want to make sure we have. And so, so that may be a positive outcome that comes as a practice for us moving forward when we're getting feedback from, different pieces that we need.
Can I just add one thing? Because I know you're passionate about this, and I know all of you are. And Julie had it on the slide that said, showed which groups we were at, but you didn't verbalize this one, but language, culture, and equity was one of our first stops. So we went up and met with David Ottenreith, and you know him and his people and the quality of their work. And I know that their staff, and it's different than, we also need to go out to community members. But that was one of our first stops. Same thing with Dennis and his group in integrated services. And then there were certain groups that were most impacted. We knew they would be over in John Passantino's shop of curriculum and instruction. So we were really purposeful, some of the very first groups that we got feedback, to make sure that we were having that lens, to make sure we were doing the right work for the kids that need us most, quite frankly.
And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate like the intentionality with which you guys are doing this work so much. And then Brian, I have a challenge for you. We know that kids pick up language best at a very young age. And I think that world language needs to be pushed down into elementary school as an experience for our elementary children. I think all the studies are showing kids pick up language much better when they're in elementary school, and that certainly is the European model, right? Kids start language when they are in elementary school. And so when we were talking about language being a requirement, I mean, kids pick up a love for language, I think, at much younger ages, and then it doesn't become a requirement, it becomes, you know, a joy for them. And so I think as a system, we need to be thinking about that.
Message received.
Okay.
That's great.
Anything else? Well, I just want to echo everybody else's gratitude for this. The list, the comprehensive list, which people you interacted with and took note from, I do hope that becomes sort of the playbook. You know, that, because I think that is just brilliant. Start with the people who are most affected. Start with the people who you know, have the most to gain, and see what comes from that. And I think pretty much every iteration that we are going to do from now on, whether it's you know, this or something else, we can follow that playbook that you've established. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate all of your time. We welcome any feedback before we come back on April 9th. And
Excellent.
Job well
All right.
done.
Thank you.
Thank you.